The first ship didn't explode. It didn't lose shields, didn't break formation, didn't even register damage. It simply ceased to exist. Admiral Redhan Var stood frozen on the command dais of the Coalition flagship as the tactical display blinked once, twice, and then quietly removed the cruiser from existence as if it had never been there at all. No debris. No energy spike. No distress signal. Just an empty gap in the formation where a warship had stood a fraction of a second ago. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the alarms began. "Confirm loss," Redhan said, his voice steady only because decades of command had carved discipline deeper than fear. "I want sensor verification from all vessels." The replies came back in overlapping bursts, each one sharper than the last, each one carrying the same impossible conclusion. Cruiser Valis, no longer on the grid. No wreckage detected. No residual radiation. No hyperspace signature. Gone. Not destroyed. Gone. Redhan turned his gaze toward the forward viewport, where the target system stretched in unnatural stillness. A pale star burned at its center, surrounded by the faint silhouettes of planetary orbits, one of which held the human colony they had come to erase. It should have been broadcasting distress signals by now. Panic. Scrambled communications. Defensive formations. There was nothing. No transmissions. No fleet mobilization. No signs of evacuation. It was as if the humans hadn't even noticed the arrival of one of the largest military coalitions ever assembled. Or worse, as if they didn't care. "Admiral," the sensor chief said, and there was something wrong in her voice now, something brittle and strained. "We are detecting localized temporal distortion near the formation gap." Rethan's eyes narrowed. "Define distortion." "Slowed." "No, not slowed, staggered. The readings don't align with standard relativistic drift. It's irregular." The words barely settled before the distortion spread. It moved like a ripple through water, invisible to the naked eye but devastatingly clear on every sensor feed. A shimmer passed across the forward edge of the fleet, and for a single, impossible heartbeat, every system aboard the flagship desynchronized. Clocks skipped. Displays flickered. Breathing felt delayed. And then reality snapped back into place. "Report." Redhan barked. "No additional losses," someone answered, too quickly, too urgently. Another voice cut in. "Wait, negative. We've lost another vessel. Frigate Line 3. It's gone, Admiral." Again, no explosion. Again, no signal. Again, nothing. Rethan's claws tightened against the railing as a cold, unfamiliar sensation began to rise through his chest. Not fear. Not yet. Something sharper. Something that felt like the edge of understanding without the comfort of answers. "Bring up all external feeds," he ordered. "I want visual confirmation." The main display shifted. Stars. Silence. Formation lines stretching across the void. And then, it appeared. Not at the edge of the system. Not emerging from hyperspace. Not approaching from any vector that could be tracked or predicted. It was simply there. A single object, suspended in the center of their formation where empty space had been a moment before. For a breath, no one reacted. Because there was nothing to react to. The object did not resemble a ship. It had no engines, no visible weapons, no defined hull geometry. Its surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, a shifting darkness that bent the starlight around it in subtle, disorienting ways. Its shape refused to settle, as if every attempt to focus on it resulted in a slightly different outline. It did not move. It did not signal. It did not acknowledge the fleet that surrounded it. It simply existed. "Human vessel?" one officer whispered, though the words sounded more like a question than a statement. Redhan didn't answer. Because if this was human, then everything they believed about humanity was wrong. "Target the object," he said instead, his voice hardening as instinct took over. "Full spectrum scan. Weapons standby." Sensors responded immediately, and then failed just as quickly. "Reading is unstable," the sensor chief reported. "Mass fluctuating. Energy output undefined. It's like the object is contradicting itself." Then stop trying to understand it, Red Han snapped. Prepare to remove it. The fleet responded with precision born of centuries of dominance. Weapons arrays aligned. Targeting systems locked onto the anomaly. Dozens of ships adjusted formation to create a perfect firing lattice. For a brief moment, order returned. Control. Superiority. Fire. The void lit up. Plasma lances, kinetic rounds, and guided warheads surged forward in perfect synchronization, converging on the silent object with enough force to vaporize a planetary surface. And then, they never arrived. Every projectile, every beam, every fragment of destructive energy simply disappeared. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Gone. As if the space between the fleet and the target had been erased from existence. The weapons did not fail. They were denied. A silence fell over the bridge so complete it felt heavier than the vacuum outside. "Admiral," the sensor chief whispered. Red Han did not look away from the display. Because something had changed. The object was no longer still. It hadn't moved. But it was no longer where it had been. And the difference between those two facts was something his mind could not reconcile. "Where is it?" someone asked. Red Han didn't answer. Because he didn't know. And for the first time since the coalition fleet had assembled, the question that formed in his mind was not about victory. It was about whether they had already made a mistake they could not undo. Phase 2. Phase 2, early intrigue build. No one gave the order to stand down. That was the first mistake. Admiral Red Han Var felt it the moment the silence stretched too long, the moment hesitation replaced instinct on the bridge. The fleet had just unleashed enough firepower to erase a continent, and the result had not been resistance or deflection or even counterattack. It had been absent. And yet, doctrine demanded response. "Reacquire target," Red Han said, forcing his voice back into command rhythm. "All vessels maintain formation. No independent maneuvers." His officers obeyed, but the precision had changed. Movements that should have been seamless now carried a fractional delay, a hesitation so small it barely registered, unless you knew exactly what to look for. The sensor chief swallowed before speaking again. "We are attempting reacquisition, Admiral, but the object, it isn't resolving." "Clarify." "It's present on passive scans but absent on active sweeps. Mass readings fluctuate between negligible and extreme. We cannot assign a stable position vector." "Everything exists somewhere," Red Han replied coldly. "Find where?" A beat passed. Then another. "Admiral," her voice dropped lower. "It may not." That answer should have been impossible. Red Han dismissed it immediately. "Then we will force it to exist," he said. "Prepare a second volley. This time, staggered fire. I want continuous pressure across all vectors. If it has a defensive threshold, we will find it." Across the fleet, weapons systems cycled again. This time slower, more deliberate. Ships adjusted spacing, creating layered attack patterns designed to trap anything that relied on timing or directional defense. Behind the calculated movements, something else began to surface. Whispers. Quiet exchanges between officers who had never questioned an engagement before. 17 reconnaissance ships, one of the tactical analysts murmured, almost to herself. Lost over the past cycle, no debris recovered. Another voice answered, barely audible. "I thought those were navigation failures." "So did I." Red Han heard them. He chose not to acknowledge them. Because uncertainty, once spoken aloud, had a way of spreading. Fire. The second barrage did not come all at once. It unfolded in waves, precise, relentless, overlapping. Plasma arcs curved through space in controlled sequences. Missile salvos adjusted trajectories mid-flight, compensating for every known variable. It was the kind of attack that did not fail. It adapted. It was overwhelming. It was erased. For a fraction of a second, it looked like it might work. Because the anomaly reacted. Not by moving, but by shifting. The space around it folded, not violently, not explosively, but subtly, like a reflection distorting on water. The leading edge of the attack reached that distortion. And vanished. The rest followed. Wave after wave of firepower disappeared into nothingness, each sequence erased with the same quiet indifference as the first. No impact. No resistance. No trace. The fleet's most advanced targeting systems recalculated in real time, adjusting aim, refining trajectories, compensating for the anomaly's behavior. It didn't matter. Every solution led to the same result. Nothing. Energy readings are spiking, the sensor chief said suddenly. Rethan's gaze sharpened. Source. The object. Not just the object. Multiple ships are registering internal fluctuations. Define fluctuations. Localized failures. Shield grids desynchronizing. Weapon capacitors discharging without command. Navigation arrays. She stopped, her expression tightening. Navigation arrays are drifting. Redhan turned sharply. Drifting where? No consistent direction. It's like positional data is losing reference. Ships are no longer aligned to the same spatial coordinates. That shouldn't have been possible. Every vessel in the fleet shared synchronized positioning systems anchored to absolute reference points. They could not disagree about where they were. And yet, confirm formation integrity, Redhan ordered. The pause. Then, reluctantly, formation appears intact visually, but mathematically, it's breaking apart. On the main display, the fleet still looked perfect. The lines were clean. Distances are exact. But the data beneath the image told a different story. Ships were no longer where they thought they were. Or worse, they were not where each other thought they were. A flicker crossed the display. Just a flicker. For less than a heartbeat, one of the outer destroyers appeared closer to the flagship than it should have been, so close it nearly overlapped with another vessel. Then it snapped back to its original position. Did you see that? Someone whispered. Yes, another voice answered. Tell me that was a glitch. No one did. Because the next moment, it happened again. Only this time, the ship didn't snap back. It stretched. Its hull elongated across space in a way that defied geometry, its structure pulled thin like a reflection dragged across broken glass. And then it was gone. Not destroyed. Not displaced. Gone. Third confirmed loss, the sensor chief said, her voice hollow. No energy signature. No debris. Rethan's pulse slowed. Not from calm. From focus. Because this was no longer an engagement. This was a pattern. And patterns could be understood. What is triggering it? He demanded. Every loss. What's the common factor? Silence fell as data streams poured across every console. Then a junior analyst spoke, hesitant but unable to stay quiet. They're all from ships that increased output, he said. Weapons, shields, propulsion. Every loss follows a spike in energy usage. Rethan's eyes narrowed. Correlation is not causation, one of the senior officers snapped. But the analyst didn't back down. Then explain why the ships holding baseline output haven't been affected. No one answered him. Because they couldn't. The anomaly remained at the center of it all, silent and unmoving, its impossible surface bending light and perception alike. It hadn't attacked. It hadn't been defended. It hadn't even acknowledged them. And yet the fleet was losing ships. Slowly. Quietly. Inevitably. Admiral, the sensor chief said again, softer this time. There's something else. Redhan didn't look away from the display. Say it. She hesitated. Then forced the words out. The object is not targeting us. That made no sense. What do you mean? Redhan asked. I mean, she swallowed. Every event, every loss, it's reactive. It only happens after we escalate. It's not initiating anything. A cold realization began to form, sharp and unwelcome. Then what is it doing? Redhan asked. The answer came from the junior analyst, his voice barely above a whisper. It's watching us. The bridge went still. Because suddenly, the silence of the human colony made sense. The absence of defenses. The lack of response. The missing reconnaissance ships. All of it pointed to something far more dangerous than hidden weapons or advanced fleets. Something that didn't need to fight. Something that didn't need to move. Something that only needed to be observed. Redhan stared at the anomaly, at the thing that existed and didn't exist at the same time, and felt the first true fracture in his certainty. Because if it was only watching, then it hadn't decided to act yet. And the question that followed was worse than anything they had faced so far. What would happen when it did? Phase 3. Phase 3, rising mystery/tension expansion. The order to hold fire did not come. It hovered there, unspoken, balanced between instinct and pride, between logic and the weight of every victory that had come before this moment. Admiral Redhan Var could feel it pressing against his thoughts like a physical force, demanding resolution. If escalation triggered loss, then restraint should preserve the fleet. It was a simple conclusion. Too simple. Maintain current output levels, he said finally, choosing neither retreat nor aggression. No further weapons discharge. No propulsion changes beyond station keeping. I want every variable frozen exactly where it is. Across the formation, the fleet complied. Engines idled. Weapons cooled. Shield harmonics stabilized. For the first time since their arrival, the coalition fleet stopped trying to dominate the battlefield. And the battlefield did not respond. Seconds passed. Then a full minute. No ships vanished. No distortions rippled through the formation. The anomaly remained exactly where it had been, or at least, exactly where it appeared to be, its shifting darkness bending the surrounding starlight into subtle, disorienting curves. Losses have ceased, the sensor chief confirmed, her voice steadier now but threaded with something deeper than relief. No new fluctuations detected. The junior analyst exhaled quietly, as if he had been holding his breath since the realization formed. It's conditional, he murmured. It reacts to escalation. Redhan did not respond immediately, because if that was true, then the fleet had not been attacked. It has been corrected. The thought settled into the bridge like a slow poison. Run a passive analysis on the object, Redhan said at last. No active scans. No energy projection of any kind. I want only observation. Acknowledged. Data began to accumulate, slower this time, more cautious. Without active probing, the sensors relied on residual readings, indirect measurements, subtle distortions in background radiation and gravitational flow. And what they revealed made even less sense. Admiral, the sensor chief said, hesitating as she reviewed the incoming data. The object is not generating a consistent energy signature. That's already established. No, she said, shaking her head slightly. I mean, it's not just fluctuating. It's contradictory. At any given moment, multiple readings exist simultaneously. Redhan turned toward her. Explain. It registers as both high mass and low mass. Both emitting energy and absorbing it. Both present and absent. It's like our sensors are observing multiple states at once. That is not possible. I agree, she said quietly. But it is what we're seeing. The silence followed that statement, heavy and oppressive. Then something new happened. Admiral, one of the communications officers said, his voice strained. We're receiving a signal. Rethan's attention snapped to him. Source. The object, he said. But it's not broadcasting on any standard spectrum. Translate it. I can't, the officer replied, his fingers moving rapidly across his console. It's not encoded in any language or data format we recognize. This fragmented. Define fragmented. The officer hesitated, then looked up, his expression unsettled. Different crew members are reporting different readings. It's not consistent across receivers. That didn't make sense. Clarify. I'm receiving a low-frequency pulse pattern, the officer said. But Lieutenant Saris is hearing audio, like tones. And the analyst team is seeing visual anomalies in the data stream. Redhan felt the edge of that same cold realization returning. One signal, he said slowly, multiple interpretations. Yes, Admiral. As if on cue, the junior analyst straightened suddenly, his eyes widening as he stared at his display. I can see it, he said. Redhan turned. See what? The pattern, the analyst replied, his voice distant, as though part of him was already somewhere else. It's not random. It's structured. It's... He stopped. Continue, Red Han ordered. The analyst hesitated, his expression shifting from fascination to something closer to unease. It's responding, he said. Not to the fleet. To us. Individually. That sent a ripple through the bridge. Explain, Red Han demanded. I don't know how, the analyst admitted. But the signal adapts depending on who's observing it. It's like it's testing interpretation. Adjusting output based on cognitive response. That's speculation. Yes, sir, the analyst said quickly. But it fits the data. Before Red Han could respond, another voice cut in. Admiral, we have a structural anomaly. Red Han turned back to the main display. One of the midline cruisers flickered. Not on the screen. In reality, for a fraction of a second, its forward section simply wasn't there. Then it reappeared. Report. Red Han snapped. No damage, the tactical officer said, confusion lacing his voice. All systems operational. No loss of pressure, no casualties. That's not possible. I agree, Admiral. The cruiser held position, intact and functional, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Because moments later, it happened again. This time, the missing section remained gone for longer. Not long enough for alarms to trigger, but long enough for every officer on the bridge to see it clearly. A segment of the ship had simply ceased to exist. And then returned. Temporal displacement? Someone suggested. No, the sensor chief said immediately. There's no temporal shift. The section isn't moving through time. Then where is it going? No one answered. Because there was no answer that made sense. Admiral, the junior analyst said again, more urgently now. The signal, it's changing. Red Han turned back to him. How? It's stabilizing, the analyst said. The variations are decreasing. It's converging toward a consistent structure. And what does that structure represent? The analyst swallowed. I think, he began, then hesitated. I think it's not trying to communicate information. Then what is it doing? The analyst looked up, meeting Rethan's gaze directly. I think it's evaluating comprehension. The words hung in the air. Because if that was true, then the anomaly wasn't just reacting to their actions. It was learning from them. Admiral, the communications officer said suddenly, his voice tightening. The signal is resolving. Into what? The pause. Then, slowly, not language. Not exactly. More like its intent. Rethan's chest tightened. Define intent. The officer's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the feed. It's not telling us something. It's a presentation, a condition. Every instinct Red Han had told him to reject that idea. But the evidence was building, piece by piece, forcing a conclusion he did not want to accept. What condition? He asked. The officer hesitated. Then answered. It's waiting. The word landed harder than any weapon strike. Waiting. Not attacking. Not defending. Not even communicating in any way they could fully understand. Just waiting. For what? Red Han asked. No one responded immediately. Because the answer was already forming in all of their minds. It was waiting for them to act. To escalate. To make a choice. Red Han turned his gaze back to the anomaly, to the thing that existed beyond their understanding, and for the first time since the fleet had assembled, he considered a possibility that had never existed before this moment. That they were not in control of this encounter. That they had never been. And that whatever this was, I had not yet decided what to do with them. Phase 4. Phase 4, complications and stakes increase. The first attempt to withdraw should have been simple. It should have been routine. Admiral Red Han Var did not announce it as a retreat. He framed it as repositioning, a tactical adjustment to re-establish optimal engagement range. The language mattered. It always had. Fleets like his did not retreat. They adapted, recalibrated, advanced in a different direction. Helm, he said, his voice measured and controlled. Execute a controlled drift vector. Minimal thrust. Pull the formation back by 200,000 kilometers. A simple command. A harmless one. The fleet responded instantly. Or rather, it tried to. Thrust engaged. the helm officer confirmed. On the display, nothing changed. No shift in relative distance. No gradual expansion of formation spacing. The stars held their positions, fixed and unmoving, as if the concept of motion itself had quietly failed. Confirm propulsion output, Redhan said. Engines are active, the officer replied, his voice tightening. All drives are functioning within expected parameters. Then why are we not moving? No one answered. Because the data insisted they were. Velocity readings showed forward drift. Acceleration curves plotted exactly as expected. Every internal system agreed. The fleet was in motion. But externally, they were not going anywhere. A flicker passed through the main display again. This time, it wasn't subtle. The stars shifted. Not gradually, not in alignment with the fleet's supposed movement, but abruptly, as if the entire field of view had been replaced with a slightly different version of itself. Constellations realigned by fractions of a degree. Distance markers recalibrated mid-frame. And then it stabilized. Navigation recalculating, the helm officer said, his hands moving faster now. Reference points are inconsistent. Inconsistent how? They're not matching across ships, the officer replied. Each vessel is reporting a different positional solution. That should have been impossible. Fleet synchronization systems were built on absolute reference anchors, pulsar triangulation, quantum-linked coordinates, redundancies layered across centuries of refinement. They could not disagree. And yet, formation integrity? Redhan asked. The answer came slower this time. Visually intact, the tactical officer said. But coordinate alignment has fractured. Ships are no longer sharing a unified spatial framework. Redhan stared at the display. The fleet still looked perfect. Disciplined. Ordered. Unbroken. But beneath the image, the numbers told a different story. Each ship believed it occupied a slightly different position in space. And if they did not agree on where they were, then they did not agree on where anything else was. Including the anomaly. Admiral, the sensor chief said, her voice dropping lower with each word. The object, it's no longer anchored to a fixed location. Redhan didn't turn. It never was. No, she said. I mean, it's now appearing in multiple coordinate sets simultaneously. That didn't make sense. Define appearing. She hesitated, then forced herself to continue. It is being detected at different positions by different ships at the same time. Each sensor array is resolving it somewhere else within the formation. Redhan felt something cold settle deeper into his chest. Put all sensor feeds on the main display, he ordered. The screen shifted. And fractured. Overlapping images layered across one another, each one showing the anomaly in a different position. In one feed, it hovered near the forward line. In another, it drifted behind the flagship. In a third, it occupied empty space where no ship should have been. The images did not reconcile. They did not merge. They simply existed together, equally valid, equally impossible. It's not moving, the junior analyst whispered. We are. Rethan's gaze snapped toward him. Explain. The analyst swallowed, his eyes fixed on the shifting data. If spatial reference is breaking down, then position becomes relative to perception. Each ship defines its own coordinate reality. And the anomaly? It exists outside that framework, he said. Or across all of them. A silence followed that statement, heavier than anything before it. Because if that was true, then the fleet had already lost control of the battlefield. They just hadn't realized it yet. Admiral, the communications officer said suddenly, his voice tight. The signal is intensifying. Redhan turned back toward his station. In what way? It's narrowing, the officer replied. The variations are collapsing. It's becoming more consistent across receivers. Translate. I still can't, he said. But the pattern, it's stabilizing. It's like it's reaching a conclusion. That word echoed. Conclusion. Redhan didn't like it. Maintain observation, he said. No further actions until... Admiral, the tactical officer shouted. Redhan spun back to the display. One of the heavy cruisers, midline, stable, untouched until now, began to distort. Not flicker. Not vanish. Distort. Its hull curved inward along impossible angles, folding into itself without resistance. Structural integrity fields flared and failed in the same instant. The ship did not explode. It compressed, its entire mass drawn into a space far too small to contain it. For a fraction of a second, it resembled a star collapsing. Then it was gone. No debris. No energy release. Just absence. Fourth confirmed loss, the sensor chief said, her voice shaking now despite every effort to remain composed. No preceding energy spike. No escalation trigger. Rethan's mind moved quickly, searching for the pattern that had held before. Energy output? He demanded. Was the cruiser increasing in power? The answer came immediately. No, Admiral. It was maintaining a baseline. That shouldn't have happened. The pattern had been clear. Escalation triggered loss. Restraint preserved survival. But this broke the rule. It's changing, the junior analyst said, his voice tight with something that bordered on panic. The conditions are shifting. Redhan felt it too. The certainty that had begun to form, the fragile understanding of cause and effect, fractured in an instant. Why? He demanded. What changed? No one answered. Because no one knew. The anomaly remained where it wasn't, present across every fractured coordinate frame, its surface bending light and logic alike. And then, it appeared closer. Not through motion. Not through transition. It was simply nearer. So close now that it occupied the forward visual field of the flagship, its shifting darkness filling the viewport in a way that made depth perception meaningless. Distance? Redhan asked. The helm officer's hands hovered over his console, unmoving. I can't determine that, Admiral. Redhan didn't respond. Because for the first time, the question itself felt irrelevant. Distance implied space. Space implied separation. And whatever this was, it did not obey either. Admiral, the communications officer said again, his voice barely above a whisper now. The signal has been resolved. Redhan turned slowly. Into what? The officer hesitated, then answered. It's not a message. The pause. It's a judgment. The words settled into the bridge like a weight. Heavy. Final. Unavoidable. Rethan's eyes returned to the anomaly, to the thing that had erased ships without effort, that had ignored their power, that had rewritten the rules of engagement without explanation. And in that moment, a realization formed, cold, sharp, and undeniable. They were not being fought. They were being evaluated. And something about that evaluation had just changed. Phase 5. Phase 5, midpoint twist/major shift. The word judgment did not belong on a battlefield. Admiral Redhan Var had spent his entire life studying war in all its forms, chaotic, calculated, brutal, efficient, but never once had he encountered a force that treated conflict as something to be assessed rather than won. War was action. War was domination. War was the outcome. This was something else. Define judgment, he said, his voice lower now, stripped of the sharp authority that had carried him through 100 campaigns. I want a precise interpretation. The communications officer hesitated, then shook his head slowly. It's not translating like language, Admiral. It's more like a resolved state. A conclusion reached after analysis. Analysis of what? No one answered. Because the answer was becoming too obvious to ignore. Admiral, the junior analyst said carefully, as if speaking too quickly might trigger something they did not understand. The signal wasn't random. It was adapting to our responses. Every action we took, it is processed, adjusted, refined. Redhan turned toward him. You're suggesting this entire encounter is a test, the analyst finished quietly. The word hung there. Not battle. Not an ambush. Not defense. The test. Rethan's mind rejected it instantly, and yet every piece of data supported it. The delayed reactions. The conditional responses. The absence of proactive aggression. The anomaly had not acted until they did. And now, it had reached a conclusion. Then we changed the outcome. Red Han said, forcing the logic back into something he could control. If this is reactive, then we dictate the variables. He turned sharply toward the command console. All ships, cease all active systems. Weapons offline. Shields to minimum. Engines to passive drift only. Total de-escalation. There was a pause. No hesitation. Because no fleet of this scale had ever reduced itself willingly in the presence of an unknown threat. Execute, Red Han snapped. The order rippled outward. Weapons powered down. Shield harmonics dropped to their lowest viable state. Engine output faded to near zero. For the first time since their arrival, the coalition fleet became still. Not just physically. Intentionally. The anomaly did not react. Seconds passed. Then more. No distortions. No losses. No movement. A fragile sense of control began to return. Hold this state, Red Han said, quieter now. Maintain it. For a moment, it seemed to work. And then, the human voice cut through every channel at once. No signal delay. No translation lag. No distortion. Perfect clarity. You have misunderstood the condition. The bridge froze. Every officer turned toward the communications array as if it had spoken directly to them, which, in a way, it had. Source. Red Han demanded. The answer came immediately. Unknown, the communications officer said. It's not originating from a ship. It's everywhere. The voice continued, calm, measured, unmistakably human. De-escalation does not negate prior action. The sequence has already been observed. Red Han stepped forward, his instincts shifting instantly. This was no longer just an anomaly. This was contact. Identify yourself, he said. You are interfacing with a sovereign coalition fleet. State your authority. There was a brief pause. Then the response came. Designation irrelevant. Function, containment interface. Containment. The word struck harder than judgment. Rethan's eyes narrowed. Containment of what? For the first time, the voice did not answer immediately. And in that silence, something changed. The anomaly, if it could still be called that, shifted again. Not in position. In presence. It felt closer. Heavier. As if the space around the fleet had tightened without physically moving. Your fleet entered a restricted system, the voice said at last. Engaged hostile protocols. Compromised boundary stability. Rethan's pulse slowed. Explain, he said. Negative, the voice replied. Explanation incomplete without contextual awareness. That is not an acceptable response. It is the only response available. A flicker of irritation rose in Rethan's chest, familiar, grounding, but it was quickly overtaken by something else. A realization. You're not defending this system, he said slowly. The pause. Correction. Defense is a secondary function. The bridge went completely silent. Because if defense was secondary, then what was primary? Red Han didn't need to ask. The answer came anyway. This system is a containment zone, the voice said. Your fleet has initiated destabilization through aggressive interaction. The words landed like a physical blow. Containment. Not protection. Not territory. A prison. Contained what? Red Han demanded. Another pause. Longer this time. And when the answer came, it was quieter. Not weaker. More deliberate. Designation unavailable in your current cognitive framework. That didn't make sense. Then translate it into something that does. Attempting simplified abstraction. A beat past. A threat class beyond your civilization's survival threshold. The bridge remained silent. Not because they didn't understand, but because they did. Red Han felt it settle into him, piece by piece, reshaping everything that had happened since their arrival. The silence of the colony. The absence of defenses. The anomaly's behavior. The conditional responses. This was not a battlefield. It never had been. It was a line. And they had crossed it. You're telling me, Red Han said slowly, each word measured, that this entire system is being held in place by that thing. Correction, the voice replied. by integrated containment architecture. Rethan's gaze snapped back to the anomaly. To include that structure. Structure. Not a ship. Not a weapon. Something else entirely. And the humans? He asked. The pause. Operators. The word changed everything. Not owners. Not creators. Operators. Which meant, you didn't build it, Redhan said. Negative. You found it. Partial accuracy. Then what exactly are you controlling? This time, the silence stretched longer than before. No hesitation. Deliberation. As if the answer required a permission. When it came, it was quieter still. Measured. Careful. We are not controlling it, the voice said. Redhan felt something cold tighten in his chest. Then what are you doing? The response came without delay. We are preventing it from waking. The words hit harder than any weapon. Because suddenly, every loss, every distortion, every impossible event took on a new meaning. The anomaly wasn't reacting to them as enemies. It was reacting to them as interference. As a disruption. As a risk. And the fleet, his fleet, had been pushing against something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. Admiral, the junior analyst whispered, his voice barely holding together now. If that's true. Redhan didn't look at him. Because he already knew what he was going to say. If we keep escalating, the analyst continued, we're not triggering a defense. The pause. Then quietly, we're breaking the lock. The silence that followed was absolute. Because for the first time since the engagement began, the stakes had changed. Not fleet versus ship. Not power versus power. Something far worse. And the question that formed in Rethan's mind was no longer about winning. It was about whether they had already gone too far to stop what came next. Phase 6. Phase 6, escalation and pressure peak. Then we stop. The words came out sharper than Redhan expected, edged with something that sounded dangerously close to urgency. Not fear. He refused that, but something adjacent to it. Recognition. Calculation. The awareness that for the first time in his command, the enemy was not something that could be defeated, only something that could be avoided. All ships, he said, forcing his voice back into command cadence, maintain total system suppression. No energy spikes. No independent actions. We hold this state until further notice. The fleet obeyed. Because even the most hardened commanders could feel it now. The weight in the void. The pressure of something unseen, unmeasured, but undeniably present. For several long seconds, nothing changed. Then the human voice returned. You have reached partial compliance, it said, calm and steady as before. Instability has not ceased. Rethan's jaw tightened. Define instability. Containment integrity has degraded beyond passive recovery thresholds. That wasn't good. How far beyond? He asked. A brief pause. Escalation probability, increasing. The words landed with quiet finality. Cause? Redhan pressed. Cumulative interaction. Of course. Every attack. Every energy discharge. Every attempt to force the anomaly to respond. They had not just crossed the line. They had worn it down. Then tell us how to reverse it, Redhan said. Give us a corrective sequence. Negative. The response came immediately. Correction unavailable. Redhan felt the first flicker of something he could no longer fully suppress. Unavailable, or you won't provide it? Unavailable, the voice repeated. System state has progressed beyond reversible parameters accessible to your fleet. That wasn't an answer. That was a verdict. Then what options remain? Redhan demanded. There was a pause. Longer than before. And in that silence, the anomaly shifted again. Not visually. Not in any way that could be measured. But the pressure in the void increased, subtle yet undeniable, like the atmosphere of an entire world compressing into a single point around them. Option 1, the voice said at last. Immediate withdrawal of all units. Probability of containment preservation, uncertain. Uncertain? Redhan snapped. That is not acceptable. It is the only outcome with non-zero survival potential. That was worse. What is option 2? The answer came without hesitation. Continued presence. The beat. Probability of containment failure, escalating to inevitability. The bridge went still. Because the meaning was clear. Stay, and whatever was contained would not remain so. Leave, and there was no guarantee it would hold anyway. Admiral, the junior analyst whispered, his voice tight with barely contained panic. We've already pushed it too far. Every second we stay increases the risk. Redhan didn't look at him. He was watching the display. Watching the anomaly. Watching the space around it distort in ways that were no longer subtle. The stars themselves seemed to bend, their light curving inward toward the center of the system, as if something deeper than gravity was beginning to assert itself. Helm, he said, his voice low now, controlled through sheer force of will. Prepare a full retreat vector. Maximum efficiency. No sudden output spikes. I want the cleanest disengagement possible. Acknowledged. For a moment, it felt like control had returned. A path forward. A decision. And then, Admiral, the sensor chief shouted. Redhan turned sharply. The container field is fluctuating, she said, her hands moving rapidly across her console. It's no longer stable across the system. The distortions are spreading. Define spreading. They're not localized anymore. The entire system is experiencing phase drift. Spatial coordinates are losing cohesion. That wasn't just bad. That was catastrophic. How long? Redhan demanded. She hesitated. Then answered. I don't know. The worst possible answer. Estimate. Minutes, she said. Maybe less. The human voice returned, cutting through the rising tension with the same calm precision. Withdrawal window narrowing. Rethan's head snapped toward the comm station. Then why are we still here? He demanded. If leaving is the only viable option, why haven't you initiated extraction protocols? There was a pause. Intervention threshold not met. Redhan stared at the console. What threshold? Determination of intent. The words hit like a physical strike. Intent. Redhan repeated. You think this is intentional? Assessment ongoing. The realization came fast. Too fast. You're still evaluating us, he said. Yes. Even now. Even after everything. The anomaly, the system, the humans controlling it, they were still watching. Still deciding. Then assess this, Redhan said, his voice hardening again, not with arrogance but with something sharper. Resolve. We are leaving. There was no response. But the pressure shifted. Slightly. As if something unseen had adjusted its focus. Helm, Redhan said. Execute retreat. Now. The fleet moved. Or tried to. For a fraction of a second, the engines engaged cleanly, their output carefully controlled, their vectors aligned for optimal disengagement. Then the system broke. Not violently. Not explosively. It simply unraveled. The stars stretched. Not into lines. Into curves. The entire field of view bent inward, folding toward a point that did not exist a moment before. Space itself began to collapse in subtle, impossible ways, distances compressing without movement, angles shifting without rotation. Navigation is failing, the helm officer shouted. We can't maintain vector stability. Override it. Redhan snapped. I'm trying. Another ship vanished. No distortion this time. No warning. Just gone. Fifth confirmed loss, the sensor chief said, her voice hollow. Rethan's mind raced. They had de-escalated. They had stopped attacking. They were trying to leave. Still, they were losing ships. Why? He demanded. We complied. The human voice answered immediately. Compliance incomplete. Redhan felt something snap. Define incomplete. The pause. You are still here. The words landed harder than anything before. Because they were true. It didn't matter that they had stopped attacking. It didn't matter that they were trying to leave. They were still inside the system. Still inside the containment zone. Still part of the problem. Then get us out. Redhan snapped. Attempting, the voice replied. And for the first time, There was strain in it. Subtle. Barely detectable. But real. The anomaly flared. Not with light. With absence. A region of space around it simply ceased to behave like space at all. A void within the void, expanding outward in slow, inevitable waves. The distortion followed. Spreading. Growing. Consuming. Admiral, the junior analyst whispered, his voice breaking now. If that expands beyond the system. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Red Han understood. Because whatever was contained here, it was no longer fully contained. And the terrifying part wasn't that it was waking. It was something designed to stop it, was starting to fail.